I'm one of the many members of Parliament here who have worked on, I know many of you in the audience, who have worked on the issue of anti-Semitism. In 1999, I helped form the anti-racism intergroup, and more recently, because of our deep concerns that there wasn't enough activity in this Parliament on the issue of anti-Semitism, we reformed the informal group on anti-Semitism in this Parliament. And I'm really delighted that we have this meeting today, which will bring an audience together of, well, all of you, very eminent and concerned individuals to launch the Fundamental Rights Agency report on anti-Semitism, which I think, and you will hear, is a very good original piece of work, which I believe has intrinsic merit, but which also I believe will lead to other good work in this field. Can I just begin by saying that this meeting has been brought together with the European Jewish Congress, the Inter-Parliamentary Coalition for Combating Anti-Semitism, B'nai B'rith International, and of course the Informal Working Group on Combating Anti-Semitism. And I'll do a whole range of thank yous and mentions of various groups as we go through the programme. First, I'm going to give the floor to the Vice President of the Parliament, Laszlo Surjan, for some introductory words to kick off the whole meeting.
I must tell you that I was verbally insulted due to the fact that I'm here with you today and I have this opening speech. I was deeply criticized by some absent-minded people, so I'm rather proud for this criticism, considering that for a complaint from an extreme right is a compliment. I prefer to follow the Pope. A Christian cannot be anti-Semitic, never. So that is my message to them, not to you, for I am afraid that, not I am afraid, I am almost sure that not too many anti-Semitic people is with us in this afternoon. So we are doing the normal things when the priest is preaching for those who are present against of those who are not present. So that is the situation now. But going to the topic, from the recent analysis of the Fundamental Rights Agency, I should like to underline that not only the different anti-Semitic insults, but the fear from them was also analyzed and investigated. And I think it's a very important topic, and what to do against this fear. One thing is connected with the insultations. Having an insultation, we should react immediately and express our solidarity. It happened one of the capitals of the European Union that an old rabbi was insulted in the street, and the state president very quickly went to visiting him and expressed his solidarity. I think that is the good example what we should follow, all of us, not to be silent in such cases. We should also be clear that the hatred is a poison. To react against any kind of the hatred is a must. Hatred against a nation is a collective punishment, which is not acceptable. It is a human rights violation. We have to avoid referring to each other as the Jewish, the Hungarians, the Roma, and so on. For all of us consist of bad guys and good guys. To put everybody into the same box, I think is very dangerous. The general judgment easily turns into a racist approach, creates hatred against innocent persons, which is a danger. Anti-Semitism is a sin, a very serious one. Never to use it unjustified. If we are blaming someone for anti-Semitism who is not, we can strengthen the false but dangerous stereotypes. If in a political competition, one party is blaming the other one, using the term anti-Semitic just to humiliate it, the real anti-Semitic groups can remain in the shadow. So I repeat, anti-Semitism is a sin. This term is not a toy for bad politicians. The condemnation of anti-Semitism is not enough. We have to act against all kinds of hatred. It is a hard work, but this is the only way to create peace and prosperity. I strongly hope that this conference is pushing all of us into this direction. So I wish you a big success for this afternoon, and I'm opening another meeting as well. Thank you very much for your attention.
When I arrived in the European Parliament in 1999, anti-Semitism was an issue, but it has become an extraordinary situation that in that time, following accession, the Fundamental Rights Agency report is finding that 73% of those surveyed see an acute increase in anti-Semitism, and that's an extraordinary situation. And I think many of the MEPs here would echo that they're seeing this not just in so-called Central and Eastern Europe, but they're seeing it also in Western Europe. And I would just want to get on the agenda right now that in the European elections to come in May, there is a real worry that a substantial proportion of the Parliament may see those sentiments and those elections deliver this kind of element into the European Parliament. I want to mention that the big difference between what we saw back then in 1999 and what we could see in just a few months' time. So this session is very important. And it brings me to my next speaker, who's Roger Cukierman, who's president of the CRIF, the French Jewish Representative Council. And Roger is vice president of the World Jewish Congress and a treasurer of the Foundation for the Memory of the Shoah, and of many, many other things in his biography, which I'm sure he doesn't want me to read out, which will be longer than his speech. So, Roger, if you want to please give us your perspective.
Jews represent, in France, the third world community after Israel and the United States, with 500,000 Jews living in France. Jews have been present in the French arena for the last 2,000 years. They have contributed greatly to the French culture, to the French artistic world, and also to the French politics, with such prominent prime ministers as Léon Blum or Mendes France. I was president of CRIF, the roof body of the Jewish institutions, from 2001 to 2007, and at that time we had already a flow of anti-Semitic incidents. I left the job from 2007 to 2030 and came back this year. And the situation which I find is much worse than what it was 6 years ago. It's much worse, first of all, because we have a fantastic growth of the right-wing political party Front National. The leader of that party, Mrs. Marine Le Pen, is extremely careful in her wording, but behind her, we know that there are prominent anti-Semites and even negationists. But this is an anti-Semitism which is traditional in France, coming back to Charles Maurras or to the Dreyfus affair or to the Vichy period. But it's not violent. Then on the extreme left, we have a new trend which is called anti-Zionism. And it's, to my opinion, the new dress of anti-Semitism. It's not elegant to be anti-Semitic, but it's quite elegant to be against the state of Israel. And this is expressed by the BDS, by the promotion of the boycott against Israeli products, which, by the way, affects also the kosher products which are sold in the same places than the Israeli products. So that is a concern. It's also non-violent, but it exists, and it affects very seriously the atmosphere. And then we have a third type of anti-Semitism, which happens in the suburbs or in the difficult areas of big cities, and which is violent acts committed by youth issued from recent immigration. And these acts are violent, and it's quite uncomfortable to go in certain areas with a kippah on the head or with signs of its Jewishness. And these acts are maintained year after year, and the figures are quite serious. I would mention the fact that out of 1,500 anti-Semitic acts committed in 2012, racist or anti-Semitic, 40% were anti-Semitic. And out of these 40%, there was 170 violent acts committed against the Jews. This represents 55% of all the anti-Semitic or racist acts committed violently in France. It's a huge proportion if you consider that the Jews represent only 1% of the French population, and if you consider also that they are committed against only the people who are apparently Jews with a hat or with coming out from a synagogue, which probably represent only 20% of the Jewish community. So the concentration of violent acts on the Jewish community is a very high proportion of the French population. And this is a very serious consideration. All this happens and is very serious. But we have had even more terrible things, like what happened in Toulouse, where there was assassination committed by Mohamed Merah, which was a Salafist guy. And our Minister of Interior told us that there are apparently 500 French citizens who adhered to the Salafist theories. Some of them are fighting in Syria, others are fighting in Afghanistan or in Mali, and some of them are probably sleeping beauties on the French territories and may wake up someday, either through orders or spontaneously, and may commit similar acts that what happened in 2012 in Toulouse. And the strange thing about these Toulouse murders is that instead of having a negative effect, a negative impact on violence committed on the Jews, on the contrary, it pushed other people to commit other acts. And 2012 showed an increase of 50% over the preceding year of 2011 in violent acts, just after the acts committed by Mohamed Merah. So this is a worry which affects very seriously the Jewish families and is the main reason for having so little Jewish child in public schools, most of them going today in private schools, either Jewish or Catholic or Protestant schools. So the atmosphere is quite heavy on the Jewish community. I just want to mention that we have anti-Semitic attitudes from the bottom, and we have also anti-Semitic attitudes coming from the top, from the parliaments, and all this creates an atmosphere where 80% of the French Jews are complaining of anti-Semitism, and some of them, big figures vary around 40%, are considering leaving their nation, France.
Let's go on to the Fundamental Rights Agency expert, Ioannis Dimitrakopoulos, who will give us, that's not fixed, I'm sorry. I always practice my pronunciations because I don't like when my name's pronounced incorrectly. So my apologies to you, Ioannis. You're going to give us a detailed overview of the research which has been carried out. So you're exceptionally allowed 10 minutes. So thank you.
The Fundamental Rights Agency has as its mission to provide assistance and expertise to EU institutions and member states on a number of fundamental rights issues. In this context, the agency providing evidence and collecting evidence has in the past years conducted surveys on migrants and minorities, on persons with a lesbian, gay, bisexual, transsexual background, on Roma minorities, on women, and in 2012 surveyed the Jewish populations. Now, what we looked at in the survey were, on the one hand, experiences of hate crime and discrimination, views on anti-Semitism and racism, concerns about safety and security, and awareness of rights and the existence of anti-discrimination legislation. Why survey Jewish people? Well, first of all, as we have for many years until now stressed, there is a lack of official but also unofficial data on the extent of hate crime against Jews in the EU. Secondly, to identify the extent of underreporting, because many victims of hate crime, in particular many victims of hate crime, do not report it to the police. Thirdly, to give a voice to the rights holder. Traditional human rights monitoring looks at legislation, it looks at existing policies, it looks therefore at what the duty bearer, what the state has done. But it's important also to survey and find out what the people who hold these rights actually believe themselves about how their rights are being fulfilled. And all that allows us to provide evidence-based advice to policymakers. Participants in the survey were around 6,000 people from many European countries. They were individuals aged 16 and over, considering themselves Jewish either in terms of religion, culture, upbringing, ethnicity, parentage, or any other basis. And they lived in Belgium, France, Germany, Hungary, Italy, Latvia, Romania, Sweden, and the United Kingdom. As I will explain, in the survey itself, in the analysis, Romania was not taken into account. It is added in the report at the end as an annex because the number of people who completed the survey was much smaller than in the other countries for a number of reasons. Therefore, the statistics that I will show you concern the 8 countries that I mentioned. When looking at the views of people, one of the key questions is how big a problem is anti-Semitism in your country? This is their view. And we see there significant differences between the member states, but we see that a majority consider that anti-Semitism is a big problem in the different European countries. Then we ask them whether they think that the situation has worsened, whether anti-Semitism has increased over the past 5 years. And again, although there are significant differences between member states, overall, a majority of people consider that it increased a lot or that it increased. Then we asked about specific areas where anti-Semitism appears. For example, the internet, the media. We looked at expressions of hostility towards Jews in general, desecration of cemeteries, political life, vandalism of buildings, and graffiti. And here you see that the first and the most important area where anti-Semitism is considered by the participants to be a big problem is on the internet, and secondly, in the media. Then we asked people how they feel if someone who is not Jewish would say a certain number of statements. Would they consider this to be anti-Semitic? And of course, the first statement, the statement that had most agreement, was that the Holocaust is a myth, or it has been exaggerated. a traditional stereotype, the Jewish people are responsible for the current economic crisis, and so on. That allows us to look at which are the statements, which are the stereotypes that Jewish people are particularly sensitive to. Then we looked at experiences. Experiences is different from views. It's not about asking people whether they think anti-Semitism is significant in their country. It's about whether they have personally experienced or heard specific issues. So we ask them, first of all, as to whether they have heard statements such as, for example, that Israelis behave like Nazis towards Palestinians, whether Jews have too much power in their country, whether they exploit the Holocaust, and a series of statements that usually appear as statements to insult Jewish people. And here we see that the situation differs, but a majority have heard in the past these statements. Next, please. Then when we asked where did you hear these statements, again the internet appears on the first place, which shows clearly that internet is a particular issue that needs to be addressed. Next, please. We also asked them as to who would be the people who made such statements, how they would be described. And the situation differs between member states, with a group of member states in the West noting particularly someone with a Muslim extremist view or someone with a left-wing political view, especially in France, whereas in the East, this is somebody with a right-wing political view or with a Christian extremist view. Then we ask people whether they are aware of legislation. To what extent do they know whether there is legislation that protects them? First of all, we ask them whether there is a law that forbids denial or trivialization of the Holocaust. And of course, here we see significant differences between the countries, which combined with the question on knowledge of legislation on discrimination shows a serious gap in rights awareness. One of the most important elements in the personal experiences of hate crime is, of course, physical or verbal attack. And here, when we ask people whether they had personally experienced such attacks, as you can see, a significant percentage, 20%, said that they had such a personal experience. This is a very high percentage that should have been reflected in police reports, in reports to the authorities that would then be handled by the criminal justice system. We also asked them whether they have personally witnessed other Jewish people physically or verbally attacked. Again, the results would show that on an 8-country average, about a third had witnessed such experiences. Again, that underlines that a large number of people should have reported this to the police. Now, apart from the survey, the Fundamental Rights Agency also publishes annually the official data on anti-Semitism. It publishes official criminal justice data. And if one makes a comparison between the official criminal justice and police data and what people responded, one comes to the conclusion that there is a serious issue of underreporting. Next, please. Now, one important consequence of having experienced or having witnessed anti-Semitic hate crime is, of course, that people will take steps that it doesn't happen to them. And we ask them whether they avoid certain places because they don't feel safe there as a Jew. Let me just say that these questions are not specific questions addressed to the Jewish population. These are questions addressed in the context of crime victim surveys to the general population as well. So whether people feel safe in particular areas. As you can see here, of those who did not experience any anti-Semitic incident, the majority does not avoid such areas. But of those who had experienced incidents, a much larger number avoids these areas, which shows that there is a relationship between experiences of such incidents and fear, and beginning to adopt strategies to avoid further victimization. The next question concerned what was said before about the concern about safety, the concern about worry. And when we ask people whether they are worried that they may become victims of physical and verbal attack, we see that a majority of people in many member states, on average in the EU, 46% are afraid that they may be subject to verbal insult or harassment, and about a third that they may be subject to actual physical attacks. And then we ask them whether they are worried about their family or their children or grandchildren, those close to them, who may become victims of physical and verbal attack. And again, the percentages are higher, so there is greater concern for those around that they may be victimized in the future. Another way, apart from avoiding specific areas to avoid being a victim, is also avoid being identified, becoming visible as a member of a minority. And therefore, we ask people whether they avoid wearing or carrying things that can identify them as Jewish, such as a Star of David, kippah, and so on. And the result here is quite telling again, because all the time 20% say that they do avoid wearing such things too, as a strategy, as a measure to avoid possible victimization. When we ask them to identify more concretely the level of reporting, whether they or someone else reported the most serious anti-Semitic incident to the authorities, the findings are very similar to those of the surveys of migrants and minorities, Roma, women, and LGBT people. A large number of people, the majority, does not report to the authorities, pointing to a problem in relation to trust, to law enforcement, and of course, this raises concern as to how this can be improved. In particular, when we ask them why they did not report a serious incident to the police, again we find the same answer as the most common one, as we do with all the other surveys, because nothing would happen or change by reporting the incidents. And of course, this is of great concern to the Parliament and to policymakers, because the feeling of the population, the feeling of respondents that action like addressing law enforcement would not bring results may have serious consequences. Then we ask people whether they have actually considered leaving the country, emigrating, because they don't feel safe there leaving as a Jew. And again, a significant percentage of people said that they have considered it, but have not yet done it. On the 8-country average, this is around 30%. Now, when we ask them about criminal victimization, the results we more or less expected. But when we ask them about discrimination, we expected lower levels, because when you look at the sample that we had, the majority in our sample was well-educated, and on average, among the general population, well-educated people are far less likely to be discriminated. Nevertheless, we found that about 11% said that they had personally felt treated differently at work because they were Jewish, despite the existence of very strong anti-discrimination legal provisions in all member states. And then, of course, a similar question on reporting. When we asked them whether they reported the most serious incident, again, the vast majority, as you see, 82%, did not do anything about it. They did not report it. When we asked about knowledge of legislation concerning discrimination against Jewish people, and again, there is strong European and national legislation on this. Although the situation differs significantly between the different countries, the 8-country average is very similar to the results of the Eurobarometer on the general population, which shows that a significant minority has no knowledge of legislation, of anti-discrimination legislation, pointing to the responsibilities of member states and EU institutions. The last question, and I will close with this, concerned being able to live as a Jew and follow traditional religious practices. So we asked people whether they would consider that the prohibition either of circumcision or traditional slaughter would be a very big or a fairly big problem for them. And as you see, despite quite significant differences between Jewish communities living in different member states, on an 8-country average, the majority would have a very big or a fairly big problem with such a development. And let me close with just a couple of key considerations. Next, please. That we have outlined when we presented this report in the context of our annual Fundamental Rights Conference in Vilnius just a week ago, that it's important to mainstream measures to tackle anti-Semitism in national strategies or action plans on human rights, on equality, on crime prevention, affecting both the national but also the local level where people come in direct contact with the authorities. To implement effectively EU law, the framework decision on racism is there, the Racial Equality Directive is there. Zero tolerance by politicians and opinion leaders to anti-Semitism is something which has been expressed very often, but also needs to be shown that it works in practice. Anti-Semitism on the internet is a virus. It needs to be addressed by both governments and internet providers, and more work needs to be done in that regard. Law enforcement has an obligation to care for and support victims of anti-Semitic hate crime. The Victims Directive is a great step forward. However, this has to be also implemented by the local police stations on the ground. Education on the Holocaust finally needs to be effective and targeted. Therefore, educational authorities need to see how they will include it in their curricula. And I will add and close with this, Chair, that Jewish and other civil society organizations should also be supported in their efforts to combat hate crime. And in this regard, there are already positive signs. One very important project that has already provided very fruitful results, Facing Facts, adds to the evidence base that the agency develops through its surveys. Thank you very much.
As a representative of Parliamentary Coalition Combating Anti-Semitism, I'm very grateful that the Fundamental Rights Agency published this survey because, of course, it needs numbers to quantify the problem of anti-Semitism. And I just would like to focus on one of the aspects Johannes mentioned, and that is that the survey respondents said that anti-Semitic content on the internet is one of the most acute forms of anti-Semitism they see, and that anti-Semitic content on the internet are for them an issue of primary importance. So I just want to mention that as ICCA, we started in 2010 to establish a task force on internet hate, not just dealing with anti-Semitism on internet, but internet hate on a broader scale, where we include parliamentarians, of course, experts, government representatives, free speech, NGOs, and I think that's new, and it's also what you mentioned, the internet industry, the internet providers, because we see that when it comes to deal as politicians and as parliamentarians, we are usually used to make laws and try to solve problems by doing laws, by implementing laws. And in this field, it often doesn't help to have laws only. So we really tried to broaden our approach to this problem. And as far as I know, for instance, at one of these task force meetings, the heads of content control from large companies such as Google and Facebook met the very first time. And so we had the chance to see what they could do, how they could get more sensitive on the problems, how they could respond if they see any anti-Semitism, any hate on their providers, on their platforms or whatever. And so we are trying to still work on this, and the task force has the aim, first of all, to create clear policies on hate speech and include them within the terms of services of the internet providers. We try to create mechanisms for enforcing hate speech policies, not just in the internet space, but also in reality, of course. We try to establish a clear, user-friendly process for allowing users to report hate speech. That is, I think it's very important that they have just one phone number or one internet address where they really can report things and that they have the feeling that they are taken serious and the problems are followed. Fourth, we try to increase transparency about terms of services, enforcement decisions. We also work on the actively encourage counter speech and education to address hate speech, because we, for instance, in Austria, we know that we have the problem on this possibilities to discuss behind articles and just say whatever you want to say. Those who have to say their clear name, their real name, it's much less hate. It's much easier to discuss on a rational level than if you go there as Mickey Mouse or whatever, because whenever you do that, hate really increases and irrational arguments increase. And so we want even to encourage users, encourage journalists to take part at these discussions, to say, no, there are other opinions too, and there are people who are not like-minded to that what comes out there in the internet very often. And last but not least, we want to unite the industry to confront the issue of hate speech and publish a report dealing and telling how it's possible to respond on internet hate, what's the best practice examples, how we want to provide case studies, and that's what we're doing. And if one of the other of you are maybe MEP or MP and would like to join us and to broaden and to deepen our work, you're very welcome.
I think that important things in this meeting have been said when Yanis made the presentation of the Fundamental Rights Agency's survey and the report. This is the first comparable survey with quantifiable data from Europe on this subject. So in that way, we very much welcome the work of the Fundamental Rights Agency and hope that all of you share this around, distribute it, and consider then what are the actions, where should we influence in order to combat and fight the anti-Semitism in Europe. The Commission takes these findings very seriously, as all the manifestations of the racism and anti-Semitism are against the European values. And we find that the report is a very important reminder to the member states to work and implement the already existing union laws in this area. It was mentioned that we do have anti-discrimination legislation. It was mentioned that we do have union legislation to fight against hate speech and hate crime on the basis of racist and xenophobic motivation. And what we think that it is now for the member states to put these in action, in practice. And the Commission will take and keep its responsibilities. We are controlling the application of these of the legislation. We do carry out expert groups to help the member states, and we are providing financial assistance for the projects that fight against racism and anti-Semitism. And actually, just right now, there's a call for proposals open for the union funding under the program on the fundamental rights. So please think also about that. What could you do if you would get union funding to fight against anti-Semitism? The deadline is early March, so you have a couple of months to come up with very concrete proposals, and we try to then select the best. Using the information that we have now received from this report, we hope we draw the attention that the agency is doing very important and valuable work. It is developing this kind of the research methodologies like the victim perception surveys, which is very original research done only by the agency currently. And we hope that the agency continues and actually extends its work to comparable data of all the member states in these areas. And naturally, we are ready to work also together with the Parliament, with the national parliaments in this policy work to fight together against the racism and anti-Semitism. Thank you.
You see, Salla, the extra applause you get for being brief as well. It's fantastic.
First of all, could we say thank you for inviting us? We're very happy to be here. We're very honoured to be here as well. And to be honest, we've had a laugh and a lot of food, so it's been great. I'm going to talk briefly about, we're going to show a short film that we made. I'm going to talk briefly about how the film came about, and then David is going to talk about the reaction to the film once it had come out. Myself and David, we're both football fans. We support Chelsea, a club in southwest London, for anyone who doesn't know. We've been going there for 35, 40 years. About 4 or 5 years ago, we were at a game. Chelsea were playing Aston Villa. At the same time, another London club, Tottenham Hotspur, were playing Hull. And on the scoreboard at Chelsea, the score of the Tottenham game came up, and Tottenham were losing 1-0 to Hull. Now, Chelsea fans don't like Tottenham fans, so Tottenham were losing, and everyone cheered. And then after the cheering, they started chanting "Yiddo, Yiddo." And for those who don't know, that's because the Tottenham Hotspur are known as the Jewish club in British football. And these chants of Yiddo, and other chants as well, which we'll talk about, but these chants have been going on ever since we've been going to football and before that, so 40 years and longer. It makes us feel very uncomfortable, but up until that point we thought, what can you do? There's a whole crowds of people are chanting this word. It didn't.
If I could just interrupt for a second, as well as say that the chant. Sorry,
Michael.
The chant as well, it spirals off into much greater anti-Semitic abuse. It's the beginning chant of much greater anti-Semitic abuse.
Yes, well, this is exactly what happened on this occasion. As I say, we've been putting up with it for a long, long time. On this occasion, the main chanting died down, and where we were sitting, suddenly we heard this voice, and apologies, but I'm going to have to swear because this is what happened. A man behind us at the top of his voice started shouting, "Fuck the Yids, fuck the Yids," at the top of his voice. Everybody could hear him. He carried on for a little while, and then someone tapped him on the shoulder and said, actually, there's quite a few Jewish people sitting here. At which point, in an instant, he suddenly changed and went, "Fuck the Jews, fuck the Jews," at the top of his voice. Right now, I don't like violence. Neither of us are confrontational people, but I cracked, and I turned round, and we had a confrontation. I told him to shut up. I told him to sit down. It was very, very unpleasant. I felt very upset. David felt very. It was really not very nice. That incident was the catalyst to making this film. We then decided enough is enough. It's time for football, in particular, but to deal with this issue. So we approached the group that Claude mentioned, Kick Racism Out of Football, with a view to making a short film highlighting this issue. Kick It Out has got a history of making films in the past, predominantly to deal with racism against black footballers, but also other issues as well. They were fantastically welcoming. They said, yes, we're very keen on the idea. It took to be honest, it took quite a long time because, as you'll see, there's some very big footballers in there. We particularly wanted footballers to speak to football fans. We felt that was the right way to get the message across. But eventually, we got the film made. And
just before we see it, can I just add one other point, which is when this incident happened, there were stewards around. I don't know how many people go to football, but there are stewards who are designed to protect people from any kind of violence, and there is meant to be a zero-tolerance policy towards racist abuse at football, but no steward intervened when this incident happened. And the key element, in a way, with this film is that there has been a vast improvement in British football grounds in racist abuse towards other minorities, but up to this point, absolutely very little had ever been done to combat anti-Semitism at football grounds.
Actually, just before, we did report it to Chelsea and to the authorities, and they said they had no footage. They couldn't find the person who did it at that point. So let's just see the film, and then we can discuss it more.
There was a word beginning with N that some football fans used to shout at players like me. They don't do it anymore.
There was a word beginning with P that some football fans used to shout at players like me, but they don't do that anymore either.
But for some reason, a lot of fans still shout this word, and it begins with Y.
What they're chanting is a racist word for Jews. The Y word.
The Y word is just as bad and just as offensive as the N word and the P word.
But some of you might think, nah, they just mean Tottenham fans. That's what they call themselves. It's just a bit of a laugh.
Is it? Well, what about these chants?
The Israel, what are they? We're on their way to Auschwitz.
Apart from anything else, racist chanting is against the law.
It's against the law to call someone a Y word in the street.
It's against the law to call someone a Y word in a supermarket.
It's against the law to call someone a Y word at a football match.
Back in the 1930s and 40s, Jewish people all over Europe were being rounded up and killed. People called them Yids.
So if, in today's game, you fancy joining in with what you think is a bit of harmless chanting, think again.
Think again.
Think again.
A film highlighting this had never been done. Kick Racism Out of Football had done various films that tried to address other issues but never this issue, and it created a very big reaction in Britain. There was a lot of coverage of it, a lot of newspaper coverage of it, and the film was shown at Chelsea, at Arsenal, at West Ham, and eventually before an England game. And over the last 2 or 3 years, it has affected, in the words of the director of television at the BBC, real social change. The FA most recently put out a statement condemning the use of the word Yid and associated anti-Semitic abuse at football grounds. The Society of Black Lawyers have come in saying that they consider this to be in amongst any other form of racial abuse that they hear at football grounds. And most recently, in fact, the Times decided to change their policy from they would always print the word Yid fully, but any other racial abuse words they would print with asterisks in them, so they would not print the word in case it was too offensive. And most recently, following a letter by myself, they've decided to do the same with the word Yid. So that is now printed in the Times of London as Y/D. And what is perhaps worth mentioning in this arena is, because I know that it happens in other places in Europe too, for example at Ajax, what tends to happen is that a club gets identified as a Jewish club. And in London, that club is Tottenham, and it becomes a complex issue because some of those fans feel that their identity as the Jewish club is what they call a badge of honour. Now, that is very problematic because most of those fans are not Jewish. 95% of them will not be Jewish. And so therefore, their argument that they are reclaiming a word, which is part of their argument, and somehow making a positive word, doesn't really apply, as the ownership of a race-hate word can't really be reclaimed by people who are not part of that religion. Moreover, you can't run a zero-tolerance campaign against racism while saying that one club is allowed to continue to be racist. And also the use of what we are now calling the Y word by those fans legitimises and continues the hatred against that club. And most importantly, perhaps, the other race hatreds that have been banned in football and indeed banned in the wider culture of English life, they are not allowed any kind of contextualisation. No one uses the N word or the P word in Britain and says, well, I'm using this as a badge of honour. So it's only the Y word that is allowed to do this. And in a way, the key element of our film, should we get to play it, I don't know if we're going to get to play it or not, but the key element of what I think both of us are trying to do is not ban any kind of free expression. Both of us are in favour of free expression. But what we would like, I think, is to feel that Jews are afforded the same protections against hate speech that has been afforded to other ethnic minorities. And that hasn't happened, really, in the United Kingdom, and it hasn't happened, I think, across Europe. So really the Y word was an attempt in football to begin that happening there, and it has had an effect. We as football fans, I think, feel that we hear less anti-Semitic abuse at Chelsea, we hear less anti-Semitic abuse at other grounds. There's been stuff in the programmes where the club and various other clubs have asked and targeted people to say, you know, we have a zero tolerance towards racism in the ground. We now extend that zero tolerance policy towards anti-Semitic abuse. So I think in conclusion, I'd like to say that if that incident that happened to us 3 years ago happened again, I would now like to believe that a steward would intervene and that the thing would be stopped.
Yeah, I was just going to add, it's an ongoing process. Obviously, we know how change doesn't happen overnight. And together with the film, there are also some educational materials which Kick It Out have put together, which are going out into schools in England, in London, in Manchester. These are available for teachers to use. It's a whole package of lessons based around the film, which I'm particularly happy about.
In fact, we can start the Q&A, actually, to David and Ivor, and indeed any of the other speakers.
To anyone.
I try, here you speak about anti-Semitism, and I try to find the sources from the growth of anti-Semitism now in Europe. And I'm living in Belgium. I can tell you that I'm not Jewish, I'm Christian, but I feel a very high anti-Semitism atmosphere in Belgium. So the sources that I find is the religion. What I ask for you is to protect religions, to propagate anti-Semitism, and especially the Islam. And Islam in Belgium, they are teaching in the school, in the mosque, and they are propagated anti-Semitism. That was an example. Huh? Another one is the conflict between Israelis and Palestinians. It is transported in Europe, so I don't know now to propose you something, but it's a reality. And the last one is that anti-Semitism is not only against the Jewish people. It is also against the people who are speaking free and public for the Jewish and Israel rights. And that is, for me, a very dangerous aspect of the new anti-Semitism.
Pascal Markovich from the CRIF France. I wanted to know what the EU Parliament is doing against, in order to fight the anti-Zionism, which is the new anti-Semitism, in particular about the BDS problem that talked Roger Cukierman. For example, I saw in the BDS France website a commentary from a man said, quick, bring back the street pajamas because after the products we will boycott the Jews. It's one example, but I think it's very
So the Israel and Zionist thing, the issue.
Kanan Lipschitz for JTA News. I have a question for Mr. Dimitrakopoulos, which is about the percentages of perceptions of anti-Semitism. I see that some people think 34% on all 8-country average think that criticizing Israel is anti-Semitism, and that supporting the BDS movement got an 8-country average of 72% mark for being anti-Semitic. So there appears to be differences of opinion as to what constitutes anti-Semitism. Do you consider this a weak point of your report, as the Hungarian government suggested, and how do you counter the arguments made by the Hungarian government to your report?
Yanis, go for it. Yeah.
Repeating surveys, yes, the FRA surveys will be in waves. So next year we will be conducting the second wave of EU Midas, which was conducted back in 2007. And hopefully in 4 to 5 years, we will be conducting the second wave of the survey. However, this always depends upon the resources, and it is the European Parliament that kindly provides our resources. On the second point, the two governments reacted to the report. The Swedish Minister for Integration and Social Affairs reacted with a very positive article in a newspaper. And the Foreign Ministry of Hungary also reacted with comments regarding the representativeness of the sample. I think if you read the report, you will see that the sample is self-selected, self-identified Jewish people, and self-selected. The methodology was decided on the basis of work together with a scientific committee of the FRA and a group of experts, both survey experts and Jewish experts who worked on us on the methodology. It is hoped that our work, which is limited given our resources, can be repeated by member states who can finance far better and larger surveys internally and who can be far more representative. It would be very interesting to see the results. And finally, I would just note that when we ask people on statements as to whether they feel that these are anti-Semitic, this precisely reflects, we put a variety of statements without shying away about mentioning Israel or mentioning the conflict in the Middle East, to see to what extent people in different countries feel that this affects us. And I think that is important because it also guides responses. You will see from the results that for some countries this is particularly important, for other countries other issues are far more important. Thank you.
My name is Rudy Roth, I'm from Belgium. You said you would like to work with Google and Yahoo to fight anti-Semitism. But my feeling is, and that's my question to you, you should go not to Google and Yahoo, but to other organizations. Because recently in Belgium, and it's still today on the internet, the public broadcasting, RTBF, has had on their Facebook a lot of anti-Semitic smear. It took them more than a week to take it off, despite several complaints to them. It took then the Center of Anti-Racism to intervene to take it off. Even the minister in charge of anti-racism said, oh no, this has been moderated, it's not a problem. Today, you have still, and I don't know if this is considered by the panel as anti-Semitism, on that Facebook, a statement that says, killing the Jews, no. It was not sufficient for them killing the Jews. Is that anti-Semitism or not? Because they say this is free speech, and that is Belgium. Okay. Thank you.
As international organization, we work with international acting internet providers, such like, I didn't mention all, you're right, Facebook, Google, YouTube, Twitter, Pinterest, Amazon, Microsoft and PayPal, which is also important because neo-Nazi groups try to make fundraising via PayPal. And I just recommend, if you have problems at a national level, maybe you can get in touch with one of the members of ICCA, which are from your country. In Austria, for instance, we established email address where you can report anti-Semitism, hate speech, and also pornography to children. And it works quite well because we have the laws to follow that and prosecute it.
I agree. There was an MEP, is that Inch, who said that indeed incitement to the hatred or violence based on the race or religion is a crime. It's not an opinion, and that we have also confirmed by the European Human Rights Court case law, that in the democratic society certain types of expressions can be forbidden in order to respect other rights like the human dignity and the non-discrimination rights. So we see that the union legislation respects the freedom of expression and at the same time then protects against the hate crime. And it's not only this, I mentioned the framework decision on the criminalization of some of the matters, but we have a specific rules also on the audiovisual media services directive, which concern indeed the television broadcast and on-demand services. And our action, what we can do is to act against and to work with the member states and their governments that they take and they implement these rules also in practice. And the only good thing I see that on your point is that at the end, also in Belgium, the website has been cleaned at least somewhat. So something is functioning. It takes time. It's not most efficient, but we hope that the outcome will be then better at the end. Thank you.
It's difficult, perhaps, in this kind of context, to quite get over the sort of all the nuances and the context in which this film was made, but part of what it led to a whole debate in the papers. David Cameron got involved. I've had a personal conversation with David Cameron where he's now talked about supporting our campaign, having initially said that he wasn't supporting it. And it brings in a whole series of issues about what free speech actually is, what the limits of free speech are, whether or not it is okay to say hate speech within certain contexts and whether it isn't. And I guess what me and Ivor were trying to do was say, well, these debates have been had about other ethnic minorities and about hate speech directed towards them. It's time that those debates were had about the words and the language directed towards Jews. And there are lots of reasons why that debate has not been had up till now, and I'm glad that we're discussing them here today.
I would argue that a lot of football fans had no idea that that word meant anything else other than Tottenham fans. A lot of them just thought, well, as Frank Lampard said, it just means Tottenham fans. So they had no idea that they were causing offence or being anti-Semitic. So in the first instance, this going back 3 or 4 years, the debate has moved on, but in the first instance, it was just to raise the issue and say this is a race-hate word, and as we say at the end, to think about it. We're not, as David said, we're not. Censorship is a difficult issue, and we've been accused of trying to censor people. We're far more interested in the debate and educating people and getting them, as the film says, to think about it and discuss it.
Yeah, and actually, just very quickly, something Ivor said earlier, there is educational material surrounding it, because one of the problems with the use of this word in football grounds is it very quickly gets taken up in playgrounds and by children, such that the word Yid and indeed the word Jew is used as a hate word in playgrounds, much as the word gay is used as well, without people thinking that that is a word that should in some way be controlled. But the film is part of an attempt to widen the net, really, of words that need to be considered as causing harm when used by children or used by people ignorantly.
Do you want to just say a very, very quick final word?
Well, I'm just impressed by the fact that especially Europe is the place where anti-Semitism is developing in such a way, from Scandinavia to Eastern Europe or to Western Europe. And it happens in Europe. It doesn't happen in America. It doesn't happen in China or in India, especially in Europe. And Europe is the base, the place where the Shoah happened. So it's specifically shocking, and I hope that the European Parliament will do something against it, like every government in this continent, because it's a shame for Europe.
Thank you. I was going to, yeah. Well, I think it's important coming from you, and I was going to close this session by saying that the reason the Informal Anti-Semitism Working Group did this is because there was a gap. There was just not enough organisation to do this and to bring you all together, and we're determined to keep doing this and to work with our partners. And I just want to thank again all our colleagues who worked to try and bring this together.